When it comes to the first season of Clean Slate, Norman Lear presents his final gift to the world through Laverne Cox giving us a fictionalized version of her story that never feels message heavy as it presents something that is very much universal while allowing for specific cultures and situations to flourish in a way that never feels message driven but instead people driven. So to summarize the first season, it's been about 23 years since Desiree has laid eyes on Harry and vice versa. And in that 23-year period, Desiree has transitioned to living her life openly as a woman, and Harry's life has pretty much stayed the same. But being that Desiree ran away to New York and Harry's in Alabama, somewhere near Mobile, her coming back is a bit of a culture shock for her and an adjustment for Harry. But thankfully for both people, over the course of 8 episodes, they find a way to heal old wounds, allow room for growth as Harry introduces the people who have become part of his community and family, and overall it gives you a sense that what Desiree ran from is not what she ends up coming home to. So getting to the review section, to start off with the characters, I feel like there's a wonderful way of how this show uses Desiree and Harry, especially when they want to put them besides Mac and Opal. Desiree and Harry clearly have issues to the point that Harry is a major topic when Desiree goes to therapy. Not in the season, but before the show started. And you can see in many ways what Mac and Opal are doing kind of reflects what Harry and Desiree are doing, and at the same time you kind of see through Opal what Desiree's life could have been if she was raised as a girl and got the kind of parenting that she perhaps wanted, desired, and maybe even needed from Harry. But when it comes to the show, they don't do flashbacks. So when it comes to Opal, in many ways, you can see that reflection of what Desiree could have been like as a child. And granted, Opal's a white girl, Desiree's a very much plowed trans woman, black trans woman at that. So physically, complete opposites, but you can see emotionally where they are in life. There are very much a lot of similarities. And granted, Harry, for his flaws, he was a workaholic. I provided for you, I did enough. Versus Mac, who had the issue of he went to prison for self-defense. Opal's mom didn't want to be active in her life, and Opal was raised by her grandmother. So you can see both Opal and Desiree are coming from a place where they need to reconcile and heal old wounds, but at the same time, it seems Opal is a little bit farther along, and with that, you see just as much where Desiree could have been, where she's going, and in some ways, even though it's never spoken out loud, you can see that connection is kind of built upon each person getting to live through the other. Opal's ambitious, maybe wants to go to New York one day like Desiree did, so she sees the future in Desiree. Desiree sees this child who's being given everything that she wanted and hoped to have, and that builds a connection because she in some ways can live vicariously through her, and it makes this wonderful relationship that ultimately, I think, for Desiree, makes it so that she doesn't just feel accepted, even tolerated to a certain point, but also needed because this young child recognizes all that she can be. And then refocusing on Harry a little bit, it also, I think, shows that why so many people who kind of stumble with their child do so well as grandparents. For it often seems that what Opal got out of Harry, as her father worked for Harry, even became partners with him during the season, you can kind of see him kind of switching what he gave Opal consistently over to Desiree to allow him to be more softer, to be more open, to be kind of the awkward, embarrassing dad, but at the same time a dad who was present. And it just overall makes for a beautiful relationship and dynamic between the lead characters. But special note has to be given to Laverne Cox as lead, because it seems that with her being listed as one of the creators and also an executive producer, she made sure to have parts of herself in this. And I would even say she wanted to make Desiree a character who wasn't just well rounded by being more than just a trans person, but also somebody who, while generally likable, also had some less desirable and even sometimes offensive or hateable traits. Probably the main ways it's shown is that Mac has some form of interest in Desiree, but Desiree is the type of person who wants somebody with money. And even though in the past this has led her down to meeting a lot of jerks who manipulated and potentially took advantage of her, at the same time she sees herself as too good for someone like Mac. And her saying this and kind of getting harsher each time she kind of reiterates it really doubles down that as much as she's a lovely person on the surface, there are some aspects of her that are very much a jerk, if not a straight up butthead. So, as much as you can like and love her, you have to also recognize there's some parts of her that are flawed, but not flawed to the point of her being somebody who would break up a happy home or mess up an apartment, but just as an individual, she got issues that can't be excused or explained away by saying that her daddy wasn't what she wanted him to be. Getting to the on the fence stuff when it comes to the characters, I have to admit, Gavin, who is the ex who apparently ruined Desiree's life, him being the type of character who, like we saw in Slate, where they're talked about and hinted for most of the season and they pop up at the end, it annoyed the hell out of me. But what makes Clean Slate especially annoying is the fact that Gavin is painted as this villain, manipulative, terrible person, yet the more we hear Desiree talk, especially to Mac, as it becomes clear she likes the attention but doesn't want to give him the idea that she would actually let him date her, it kind of makes you wonder how much of this is BS so that Desiree can come off like a victim in that relationship, and how much of it was her actually being an active participant. She makes it seem that Gavin's the one who isolated her from everybody, led to her making bad decisions, but she's a grown-ass woman. So there's that need to ask, is this a case of, similar to her issues with her dad, Harry, how much of this is stuff that she's avoiding accountability over, and not getting to know Gavin or really see them interact made it so that you feel like you don't get the total picture over the course of the 8 episodes. Which leaves one last on the fence topic when it comes to the characters, and that's just the character Ella being the sole maternal figure. For while there are various women of the church who have dialogue, Ella's the only one who really gets to be seen consistently, and it's a wonderful thing how parents are shown in this show to be loving, caring, and everything, but a part of me does wish that we got to see Opal's mom to kind of give a full balance to that. Never mind, I really wanted to see Opal's grandmother who raised her, especially if that's Mac's mom, so that we can kind of see her take on partly raising her granddaughter, her take on what's going on in Mac's life and how she sees him, not to kind of counterbalance the positivity of the show, but to kind of further the realness of it, because sometimes, as we'll mention later, Clean Slate does get kind of corny to the point where it feels like it wants to be more uplifting and even kind of optimistic than anything. So getting to the next topic is the world building and culture. And as a highlight, I do appreciate the balancing act done here, because we have Desiree and then we have her best friend Lewis, who are both part of the LGBT plus community, with Desiree being trans and Lewis being gay. There's always that potential for people who don't know much about a show that it can be seen that it's going to be just for this niche, just for this culture. And I would say that's not necessarily the case here. Is Desiree being trans a notable part of her storyline? Yes. Between her father having to adjust to the fact that he has a daughter now, that he has to call her by the name that she gave herself instead of the one that he and his wife gave her. Never mind the community, especially the church, pastors specifically, having to face the idea that Desiree is who they are and happy, not necessarily hurting anybody, but at the same time, their faith conflicts with the idea of this person being who they are and that not being something that's, I don't want to say sinful, but definitely something that's complicated for their faith. And then for Lewis, you have his storyline dealing with the whole issue that he might be very much in a glass closet, but he still feels the need to be closeted. For even though he's the choir director, has his effeminate moments, he still sees himself as passing. His mom already knows. It seems most of the community knows, but he in his mind thinks he's passing. But the jokes that come from that aside, it's very interesting to watch that in terms of you recognizing that, similar to there was a movie that came out recently, Young Hearts. It reminds you that a lot of the times, as much as queer media has very much focused on the idea it's always the outside that's the problem, that puts somebody under the pressure that they need to stay closeted, a lot of the times it's also an internal thing. In getting onto that journey, taking the first step, making the first leap, coming out to your friends, your family, community, and then eventually just living your truth, it's a long process. And it's not something that could be quickly done through every single situation. And as much as it may seem like everything we said is very much about what the LGBT community go through, let's not pretend like this is a lot of universal elements to that. Being who you are, true to yourself, is not just about your sexuality. It could also be about how you present yourself in terms of whether you're more masculine or feminine. So that brings in the whole way of gender presentation. When it comes to what Desiree went through, she felt that she was stifled not just because of sexuality, but also because she's an artist, and her father saw it as, you're going to get into a stable job potentially, you're going to take over the car wash for me, and even if you're not someone who can scrub and clean, you could hire someone like Mac who can do that. But that's not what she wanted. So you see that whole issue of somebody expecting you to follow in their footsteps. And you can even see in terms of Opal and what she brings to the show and kind of expands on when it comes to Desiree's story, the idea that you're going to be trapped if you stay here and don't leave as soon as you have the first opportunity to. For when it comes to Lewis, as much as you can see that he enjoys his job working in a church as a choir director, who's to say that he didn't have father ambitions, but he settled on this because it's stable. It allows him to be near his mother, who he has a good relationship with, but it doesn't necessarily fulfill him in a way that perhaps going with Desiree to New York could have, and him becoming a singer on his own, maybe doing something with on Broadway and training other singers. It's, as we said in the beginning, while there are specific circumstances when it comes to each character in their storyline, if you expand out more, you can see how it connects to general issues, general things that people go through, even if it's just a case of having a struggled relationship with your parents, going from seeing them as an authority figure, provider, to somebody you could actually have a real conversation with and be vulnerable without them telling you to stop crying because you ain't got nothing to cry about. Which leads to the second highlight when it comes to the kind of world and culture that's built for a clean slate. And that's just the fact that when it comes to this show, we got people who actually got some mileage on them, for lack of a better way of putting it. George Wallace, who plays Harry, is 72 years old. Telma Hopkins, who plays Ella, is 76. Laverne Cox, who's the lead, is 52. And I feel like when it comes to shows, very rarely do we get to focus on this many people from underrepresented communities who are further along in age. Never mind, you got someone who's a woman who's up in age, you got someone who's a man's up in age, and the lead is also up in age, and nobody is just there because it's somebody's grandma's or somebody's aunt or something like that. Each person has their own story going on, they have their own life going on, and it makes it so they're not just an accessory. They're a full-fledged person who just happens to be within their 50s or 70s and still especially when it comes to the case of Ella, vivacious and willing to show off their top in order to get into a club because they know what they got going on. So getting to story and pacing, the way that Clean Slate builds its characters out over the 8 episodes is very much where I wouldn't say it takes turns because it's not like a very large ensemble, but it definitely gives you tidbits every now and then when it comes to certain characters, then has them catch up to other characters who got to focus on in the last episode. And with that, it mostly uses season 1 to build a foundation rather than really take this season as some way it could just jump far as they can go. But while we do appreciate the character building and story in terms of how it handles why Mac went to jail, how things are going in terms of him trying to get his life back on track, and even Desiree getting her life back on track, one of the things we don't like is them trying to pair Desiree and Mac in the way they handle it. And that's just because as much as establishing Desiree as bougie is part of building some kind of flaw in her that isn't necessarily damning but definitely makes her someone not pristine, I don't like the fact how they escalated and they still make it so that she remains an option for Mac. And by the end of the season, as much as you appreciate Mac being forgiving, especially because of how much Opal has connected with Desiree, at the same time, I hate the fact that he loses opportunities because of Desiree, and it's likely that in the second season they're going to continue to make it so that Desiree, if she's not in a love triangle, she still has some type of chance with Mac, even though it's clear that she's either settling because of proximity or because he's the only one that's giving her the time of day. Overall, when it comes to Clean Slate, it feels like most Norman Lear productions where there's a tease of controversy, a sense of humanity, and also, especially with the later stuff, a sense that there was an effort to figure out, with there not being the same type of boundaries like he had to deal with network TV, how can he push things forward when the line is so far out? And I think one of the struggles that Clean Slate has is because there's been so much done in terms of trans representation, even though it's very rare to find a sitcom featuring someone who is trans like Laverne Cox and make it so that that's not all the story has to offer. Where can you go? What is a line you can push without eventually feeling like you're a show that's trying to just deliver a message of kumbaya and diversity? And I think in the first season, that's something that Clean Slate kind of struggles with. And while it definitely, through Desiree's journey, gives you likable characters with complications to them and everything, it's definitely in a place where it's still growing and trying to finish its foundation so it can really build up to something bigger. And now with Norman Lear unfortunately passed, so comes the question of, can it take what he started and potentially fill that potential? And it's hard to say.